how we can get light in our life. Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller, as you know, is someone that I always learn so much from and am very motivated by and lifted into that light. So let's all heartily welcome Reverend Dr. Ruth Miller.
Thank you, dear. Now, we ended up having to put two different slideshows on one computer, so you have to put up with me for a second.
We can do that.
I think we can. I hope so. All right.
Celebrations of light.
Right. Yes. Well, those of you who have tracked me for the 10 years I've been coming here speaking on regular basis, and the 3 or 4 before that, know that this is the time when I get to share with you what goes on around the solstice. The solstice is that time which in this hemisphere, in the northern hemisphere, is the darkest time of the year, right? Long, cold, dark, gray nights, and sometimes short, cold, dark, gray days. Right? I had the delight, though I have to say, I was requested to be in Bend Friday evening. It went up to 50 plus degrees. It was sunny the whole trip, both way and back, in December. So as we experience these cold darknesses, the nature of humanity is to say, I want more light. Please, please, please. And for the folks who live up in the Arctic Circle, about now is when the sun has dipped below the horizon, and it's not going to pop up again for about 10 more days, or maybe even 2 full weeks. And that's a long time not to see that strange round orb that glows in the sky. I have friends who say in Oregon that really is a UFO. So as we consider this, we realize that from ancient times, people have done what they could to get that back up here. It's literally calling back that sun, that light, because not only is it dark, but all the critters are going away too. You know, the little animals are burrowing in the ground, and the birds have migrated away, and the fish are now under the ice, and it's a really rough time. And in the just below the Arctic Circle area, it's even colder and wetter than it is here, you can imagine. And without insulation, without the things that we have to protect us from that, it's hard to never really be warm and dry, right? And so there is a real longing for that sun to return. And the first thing people do is they put flames in their homes because, as anthropologists call it, it's called imitative magic. If you want something, you imitate what it is. Now, in today's world, post-2000, the Book of the Secret world, it's the law of attraction. It's you bring into your life what you wish more of by already being and having that. So most of what goes on around the winter solstice, on whether it's in December in the northern hemisphere or June in the southern hemisphere, is various indicators, various attempts to bring that which was desired to be experienced into the experience. The period between Samhain and Yule, that midpoint, which is we call Halloween, that's the midpoint between the equinox and the winter solstice, was a time of preparing. It was the time when people are realizing, oops, it's going away. And then beginning to say, okay, well, we've completed the harvest. We need to prepare everything to get through the winter, this cold, dark time. And we need to prepare ourselves for more darkness. And so it was the time to not only be physically prepared and emotionally prepared for the darkness, it was also the time of beginning to call back the light. The Roman Church, the Roman Christian Church, was established by a group of bishops, a group of local leaders, And one of them was a guy that we call Saint Augustine. He was Augustinius at the time in 325, in the year 325 of the Common Era. And he told the group of bishops that were gathered, being told by Constantine, come up with this church. I've already adopted it. You better create it. And what he told them was, don't try to impose our structures, our beliefs on all these different provinces that have all these different religious traditions. Simply adopt them and adapt them. And so this time of preparation between Samhain and Yule, which the Celts had been doing for 1,000 or more years, was adopted and adapted by the Roman Christians. They also adopted something else, and that is throughout the Roman Empire, from the Middle East all the way up into the Arctic Circle, there was a tradition that at the winter solstice, the son of the sun would be born. The new day star would be born. Now that's not on the 21st of December or the 20th or the 22nd, that 48-hour period where the solstice happens, because solstice means sun standing, solsticere, okay? It's sun standing. The solstice is actually a 3-day period where, from the perspective of people on the ground, the sun ain't going anywhere, right? It's just standing there. Oh no, is it gonna stay there forever? I hope not. That's the kind of thinking we're talking about. So now not only do we have to call it back, we have to get it to move again. Okay? Well, it starts to move the morning of the 3rd day. 3 days. We've heard about this 3 days other times of the year. But this time, it is the morning of the 25th of December. And this is when the new day star is born. This is when the son of the sun is born. This is when Mithras was born. This is when Horus was born. This is when a number of other very powerful masculine kingly figures in the god pantheons were born. And so, of course, we're going to adopt and adapt that, even though the Bible clearly tells us that he's born in the spring. But that's another story. So we're going to adopt and adapt that this glorious being, this divinity, this son of the sun, is born on the 25th of December. All right, so now we have Yule, the Samhain to Yule period is preparing, for the birth of the core of our religious tradition, the Christ. So now we have a Mass on the 25th that is the Christ Mass. And now we are preparing for the Christ Mass. We're preparing for the birth of the Son of the Sun and the new day star. So Advent then shrunk, because that was a long time to be in preparation. It wasn't just about preparing physically, it was about preparing socially and spiritually as well, and people would be expected to engage in very specific rituals and contemplate and fast during that period. So after about 1,000 years, along about 1000 AD, or BCE, or CE, Common Era, we have a pope saying, let's make it 4 weeks. It took a couple hundred years before people got around to that, and along about 1200, then it became normal for that preparation period prior to the birth of the Son of the Sun, the new day star, to be celebrated. And as I said, you got to have a lot of gold, and I didn't say we have to have a lot of gold, but we have to have a lot of light. So one of the things that we do is we celebrate 4 weeks of preparation, ad venir, coming to. And that's what these candles are for. So I'm going to get down and light these candles. And I'll try to adjust that so you can hear me. So the first week of Advent, the first Sunday, now on that 4-week calendar, is the Sunday usually right after Thanksgiving, okay? And on the first Sunday of Advent, we go into a state of hope. Hope for a world that can work. hope that the Son will actually return, hope that divinity, that life, that love can happen. The second candle of Advent is normally in most churches for peace. But in the world that I work in, which is the New Thought world, in which we know that what we believe deep down is what we experience, we call this candle faith. This is where what we know deep down becomes our experience. What we had hoped for is now what we know can be and we know must be in our lives. So the second week of preparation is to focus on faith. The third week, this is the third Sunday of Advent. I lit this Wednesday night a little ahead of time. This is a different color. This is the rose-colored candle. These other are purple, they're violet. There's some variation on the royal color. I chose. And the rose is because rose is the color for the feminine divine. That's why little girls wear pink, folks. And it is for love, the love candle. And it's usually the Sunday that people focus on Mary receiving the announcement that she was pregnant, whether she liked it or not. And the love that she felt for her people, for the source, and for this infant that she was going to be bearing. So the third week of Advent is that. The fourth week of Advent is usually for joy, and it can also be for that peace that passes understanding, which for me is a deep source of joy. So next Sunday, I won't be here, but I trust that someone will light your fourth candle. The little one down here, that's for the little one. He's going to be born on Christmas morning. Now, Advent is simply the one that the Roman Church took on and named. But there are approximately 29 holy days between that beginning of the Advent period and Epiphany, the first week in Epiphany in January. And among them is Hanukkah, and today is the first day of Hanukkah. So I have to go over there. If I can find this cord, here it is. So, Hanukkah, on the first night, we have our lighting candle, and we light the first candle. Now, remember, in Hebrew, you don't read from left to right, you read from right to left. So the first candle's on that side, for you guys. Hanukkah is something that some records say that Jesus and his disciples went to Jerusalem to celebrate the Festival of Lights. It is a holy day, series of holy days that are honoring when the Greeks tried to take over Israel, what we call Israel today. And they did take it over, and then they tried to convert the Jewish temple, the Hebrew temple, into a Greek temple. And they just went on up with their statues from the Pantheon, and they were going to do that. And a bunch of folks, local Jews, said, not happening. There is only one God. There will not be multiple gods in our church, in our temple, in our synagogue, in our holy land. And so they went up and fought against the Greeks doing that. The Maccabee family were the primary folks, and as the story goes, they were able to restore control of the temple, but a number of things had been desecrated, a number of things had been damaged, and there was only enough oil in the lamp that was supposed to be lit eternally as the sign that the divinity is living here. Yahweh is here, is what that lamp meant. And so the first thing they did is they lit it, and there was enough oil for one day. But the Maccabees held that temple against the Greeks for 8 days, and that lamp remained lit. And so we light a version of the menorah that's called a Hanukkah with these 8 lights. And every night we celebrate the fact that the people held against the pagan polytheists and were able to retain control of the temple for that period of time. And it was a miracle, of course. And we're honoring the miracle of light being present where darkness appeared to be the only possibility. And really that's the theme, isn't it? Light is present even when darkness seems the only possibility. And I think that's so important at this time in our human history. We also have already had in the last week Krampusnacht and St. Nicholas Day. And if you ever saw the movie that was Hans Christian Andersen and the Silver Skates, you got to see this. I was tiny when I saw it as a man, but it stuck with me, what St. Nicholas Day is in Krampusnacht. And in the northern parts of the German-speaking areas and in the Netherlands, this is when what we call Santa Claus shows up. But the night before is when the tree gets lit and presents and all kinds of things happen. Now, who's Krampus? Krampus is this nasty old guy who comes with the coal and the switch. The good children get St. Nicholas and the bad ones get Krampus. Interestingly, on the other side of the planet, they're also celebrating this time. Now, prior to Bodhi Day, in the Hindu tradition was Diwali, and Diwali is a festival of lights that's just about the midpoint between Samhain and the Yule. And then we get Bodhi Day, enlightenment. It's the day of enlightenment. Isn't that cool? And this year it was on the 8th. Then we have the 3 days of little Juan Diego. Juanito Dieguito. And I think, nope, I gotta back up a little bit. I'll tell you more about that in a little while. Introducing the Lady of Guadalupe. And finally, yesterday was Santa Lucia. Okay, so when I learned the English version of that, it was the moon rising while the sailors were out on the ocean. Holy light. And I was listening to Christian radio, yes I do, and this wonderful woman was just so happy because she has a relic of St. Lucy. And St. Lucy, because some priest that she knew was giving it to her because she was having eye surgery. And so Sarah, St. Lucy's on your side. St. Lucy, the holy light, Santa Lucia. And there's a whole, the way it goes is, there are many conflicting stories about this saint because we really don't know much about her. The only thing is, Santa Lucia means holy light. And it was written in the Mass in the 2nd century that we get to call on the holy light. But someone turned that into a person. They adopted and adapted. And you will find that many of the saints of the Christian church are in fact qualities that have been given a person as a name, as a being. So, what's really cool is that the place that Santa Lucia is honored most is Sweden, and Denmark and Finland and Norway. But in those countries, she is honored. The top one is a sketch of Santa Lucia coming with her escort, a young man with a torch, and she brings spiced breads to various people, and she visits the healthy and happy people. She, in a household, is a adolescent girl, the oldest girl in the family, and she wears this wreath with candles on her head. The story is that St. Lucy, Santa Lucia, was secretly supporting the Christians in the catacombs, and rather than carry a torch in one hand and bread in the other, bring a torch, Jeanette Isabella, no. She was putting the light on her head like a coal miner's lamp, right? So she wore the candles on her head so she could have 2 handfuls of food. And when she came to visit the catacombs. So that's where that story of the headband, if you will, comes. And then all the little boys with the conical cones on their heads, There's like 4 different versions of that, and they have to do with either being gnomes that support the local Norse version of Santa Lucia, or they could be little imps, or they could be bishops. Fascinating. So the other piece to be aware of, though, is prior to the arrival of the Roman Christians in that part of the world, there was Lucisnacht. So Santa Lucia gets adopted and adapted with Lucisnacht. But Lucisnacht was like Krampus. It was a female version of Krampus. Not weird. So they turned her around and turned her into the bringer of light. And this is, remember, this is the night that is the first night the sun has totally disappeared. So this could be the middle of the afternoon, looking like that. And often during school time, children are doing these ceremonies. This bottom one is they're doing it in the Swedish Parliament in the middle of the day. That gets me back to Juanita de Guito. Anyone want to try his real name? Cuauhtlacautzin. Cuauhtlacautzin was an Aztec shaman who, when his family, his wife died, his mother died, he was left with an uncle who was very sick, he began to check out those monks over there in what we call Mexico City. And he lived 50 miles away. And he would make the walk every week from where he lived to Mexico City. And one day, after he buried everything, in seeking things divine, see that down there? He belonged entirely in the monastery and chapel at Tlatelolco, about 14 miles away. Sorry, it was 50 years and 14 miles. I switched that, apologies. So 14 miles, he walks over to the monastery. And on this Saturday, early in the morning, during the deep, dark winter when the sun is still not showing up, he happens to pass this one hillock in Tepeyac, and the sun was just beginning to come up. And what he sees and hears is a celestial sound, and against the light of the sun is this woman floating in the sky. Now, in the Christian story, the woman is Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Mother Mary. In the Aztec version, she has an Aztec name, and she is the local Aztec goddess. Isn't that interesting? The local Aztec goddess shows up and tells Juan that she wants a chapel to the Mother Mary built on this hill. So he runs to the bishop, he waits all day, they finally let him in, and the bishop says, yeah, right. And he says, go get me a sign. So she told me, he runs back to the hill, this is over a 3-day period, he goes back and forth. Finally, she gives him a sign. He goes up on the top of this barren hill in the depths of winter, and it's covered with roses, but flowers that would have been found only in Castile, Spain, which is where the bishop grew up. So he runs up to the hill, and she told me to give them to you. She tells him to pick the flowers and take them back to the bishop, so that through them I might bring about your seeing in them the signal you had requested. This is a direct translation from the Aztec texts, all right? And so that the truth of my own word, my own commission might be apparent. Yes, here they are, do but deign to receive them. And he opens his tilma, the cloak that he'd wrapped all these flowers in to bring them. And instead of a bunch of flowers coming out, this painting comes out. That is the original tilma in the church that was built on that hill. And it has never decayed since 1500. An image on a piece of cotton. And again, like the Shroud of Turin, there's no evidence of paint. Fascinating, ain't it? So he was a shaman in the Aztec tradition, converting to Christianity, and basically this was the Aztec goddess giving the locals permission to go ahead and do what the Franciscan monks were telling them to do and become Christians. Right? So that's another holy day celebrated at this time of year. This is the Hanukkah story. This is the Prince Gautama story. I love this one because some people think he sat under the Bodhi tree until he was enlightened. No, he got enlightened by a riverboat guy singing. He grew up in a palace. For those of you who don't know the story, and there's wonderful versions, and there's one called The Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves. Oh, if you get to, watch it. There's another one that's an animated one with Richard Gere as the narrator. Lovely. Both of them are beautiful stories. But anyway, he grows up in a palace. His father's trying to prevent him from ever seeing anything like suffering. So he's 26 years old before he ever sees an old body, before he ever sees any kind of illness. And it just strikes him to the heart. All right? So he manages to miraculously, him and his buddy get out of this very closely guarded palace area that he had been living in, and goes off and he joins the ascetics. Now the ascetics are these people who live on nothing. They would drink dewdrops off of leaves, and they would take a grain of rice out of bird droppings, and that was what they were eating and drinking. And he did that in the forest for years, and there's all kinds of legends about that. And then one day he happened to come to the river, and he saw this man on a boat on the river singing. And the man was obviously not suffering at all. And it woke him up. And then as he's contemplating this, a little girl comes in from the village and offers him, because he's clearly a holy man, she offers him a bowl of her rice pudding. And he looks at it and he remembers his mother had died when he was born. So his stepmother had made this rice pudding, and he'd never tasted it. And Kat and I had some at the Himalayan restaurant last night. She discovered how wonderful it is. It's a recipe that's been around for about 1,000 years. And he took one taste and he got it. Between the song and the rice pudding, there is a way between having too much, having too little, the middle way, right? And that began. Then he sat under what is called the Bodhi tree, Bodhi meaning Buddha in Hindi. So he sat under the tree for 40 days and nights to cement this enlightenment in him and discover how to share it with us. So it's not only we're honoring his enlightenment, we're honoring a process for our enlightenment, right? In this midst of this time. I love this, obviously. All right, and that's just a few. Here's a couple more. Las Posadas. Anyone been in Mexico during Las Posadas? Right, moving from house to house. You can't go far at this time of year, but you can go from neighbor to neighbor. And I was sharing this with a group the other day, and the guy said, I grew up in northern Quebec, where this is how's normal. We're talking about dark for a long time, and we're talking about having to prepare for the long winter. And at the beginning of this period, right around Santa Lucia's Day or whatever, they would have a series of processions going from house to house, and people would bring things to share. And if someone's home didn't have something to share, everyone else knew who needed some help. Isn't that cool? Right. And then there's, of course, Yule, the solstice, and the Lakota honor the 3 days of the solstice, the Sioux. And then Yalda is in the Persian tradition. This is one of the ones that was adopted and adapted. Mithras comes out of the Persian tradition. And then Panchaganapati. Anyone got an elephant in your house? Yeah. Anyone got an elephant-headed boy in your house? Ganesha. Yes, Ganesha. In India, almost every home has a Ganesha on the front, because he is the one who clears the way with his trunk. He's the son of Shiva and Parvati. And Shiva goes away and fights battles, and he comes home and he finds Parvati bathing in the river. But she had gotten lonely while he was gone, so she made a baby boy. But Shiva only recognized that there is a masculine presence watching his wife bathe. So he immediately, without asking anything, cuts off the kid's head. And Parvati is just heartbroken, in shock. And she goes, that was my son, that was our son. And he goes, oh no, I can't undo it. Shiva, almost all powerful, can't undo what he's just done. And a baby elephant comes up and says, he can have my head. And that's the beginning of Ganesh. Yeah, there's a whole lot we can do with that, isn't there? Yeah. So, again, that same period, those 3 standing days of solstice. In the Wiccan tradition, this is the wheel of the year. We are now up there where the crow and the moon are, and we're at that high point, that point in the middle at the solstice, and then we get into the winter and so on. So the Wiccan tradition, this is the core of the process. We are on the wheel, we have turned a complete turning, and we are moving into the beginning of a whole new process. And so a lot of what the Roman Christians got to do was take the Celtic, now Wiccan traditions and weave them in. So the wreath is a part of that. The Saturnalia tree that the Romans adopted and included in their post-solstice celebrations comes out of the Celtic tradition of bringing living things into the home. So all the greens, all the garlands, all the wreaths, all the trees are all about bringing living things into the home, because it's looking pretty dead out there. Let's have some life in here, yeah? There's more. In the Northern Caucasus, the birth of the sun, Malka. Then, of course, Christmas. St. Stephen's Day, the day after Boxing Day, the day after the solstice, is saying, oh good, the sun is back, now we can go about and sharing our gifts. And then Kwanzaa was invented by an African-American professor in the 60s because there wasn't anything visible that folks who felt identity with African-American descent could relate to. If I were Swedish American, I had St. Lucy's Day, right? If I were Italian American, I had if I were Irish American, I got St. Patty's Day if all else fails. But if I'm African American, I haven't got anything. So he created Kwanzaa. And it's kind of cool. And then, of course, New Year's. And then in Greece, the person we call St. Nicholas, they call Father Christmas, but he looks the same, and he arrives on New Year's Day. In Kwanzaa, the greeting is Habari Gani. All right? What's the news? Not how are you? What's the news? What's up? What's shifted and changed, right? And then each day, again, we got candles. Again, we've got a week of candles, right? And each day stands for a different process. So it's very much taking the Advent piece, and in my family, the Hanukkah piece, because every day stood for something. One day was socks, another day was books, and so on. Anyway, we take the Advent and the Hanukkah piece, we merge them together in an African harvest festival using Swahili terms. I worked for quite a while in the inner city in Portland, and anyone in the inner city who wanted to really accomplish something would take one of these terms as the name of what they were doing. It was kind of cool. So Umoja means unity. It means we are one, and that's part of why we sing that verse today. Kujichagulia, self-determination. I am not dependent on anyone for my choices. No one else is responsible for the choices I am making. And in the inner city of the U.S. culture, that was a big thing for a lot of people to learn. So weaving that into it every day was amazing. Ujima, working together. Ujima'a, cooperative economics. setting up co-ops, setting up sharing systems, setting up community dollars, setting up all kinds of ways that we are working together to make sure we are economically secure. Nia, having purpose in life. You may have seen that word Nia around in other places since. Kuumba, creativity. And this particular congregation is very strong in Kuumba. Imani, faith. Faith that we can make it through. Faith that what must be, must be. What can be, must be. And finally, everyone says, Harambe! Let's say that together. Harambe! All right, let's pull together. Let's make this happen because that's what life is about in community. There's more. In my family, I started celebrating the beginning of Advent to 12th night when I had little kids. My grandmother had taught me about the 12 days of Christmas that start December 25 and last until January 5. They are not the days prior to, okay? The first day of Christmas is December 25. So you don't get to sing the song until then, no. But in my household, I would tell the kids, you know, I love Christmas carols. I can sing probably 50 different Christmas carols. And we don't start until after Thanksgiving. Advent, we start singing Christmas carols. Advent, we put on the spiced cider. It's on the stove from now till 12th night. Okay? And then all of these saints' days and holy days that come up during Advent, including my Hanukkah family, we all do all of it. So that it isn't just one big blowout called December 25th. That was my goal. So we began to do Advent, and we would set up an empty nativity in the living room, the stable for a creche, which, by the way, was invented by St. Francis in 1225. We would put that up, and then over the course of Advent, we'd put in a sheep or a cow or a donkey or whatever into the stable until the day before, and when we would put Mary and Joseph in there, until the night of, when we put the baby in the manger. And then my younger daughter started placing the kings around the living room. And over 12 days, she'd move the kings to the stable. And then on the 6th, we'd take it all down. So that Three Kings Day is the day they arrive, right? If you read Shakespeare's play or saw Twelfth Night, that was part of the Roman tradition of Saturnalia, adopted by the Christians as the 12th night experience, and it was the night before the kings arrived. And if you ever saw Amal and the Night Visitors, it's about the king's journey to arriving on Epiphany, which is Greek for discovery. Discovery. All right. And then the Apostolic Christmas, I remember when I was growing up, there would be some places where there hadn't been trees during Advent at all. And suddenly there'd be trees a week after Christmas. I go, what's that? And Mom would tell me it was these Eastern Europeans celebrating Christmas on the 6th of January, or the 7th, or even the 8th in some parts. Then there's these movable feasts, and Sade and the Lunar New Year are usually there. Sometimes they're as early January, and sometimes they're as late as mid-February. Oh my goodness. I think it's safe to say that people want to celebrate life. What do you think? Yeah. There's Epiphany. Okay, so what are the common elements? It doesn't matter what religious tradition. It doesn't matter what part of the world we're in. There are these common elements. We have lights in the darkness. We have fires in various forms. And the Yule log is taking last year's log that we lit at the solstice. And after it died out, we put it away. And now we bring it out and we let it be the basis for the new one that we're lighting. And then we're going to put this one away and bring it out. So a sign that the old year is passing and a new one is beginning. Bringing in all the greens, the circles, stars, spheres, gold, anything we can that emulates the sun in that imitative magic or law of attraction, right? And then music and dance everywhere, all these celebrations, the feasting, the sharing of gifts, using and sharing our excess. We've planned out our winter meals, and we're going to have to kind of stretch them, but we're going to have a feast before that, right? And then the ancient stories, I've shared a couple of them with you, and basically it's what has been is done, and a whole new way of being is unfolding. It doesn't matter what tradition we're from. You don't have to be a druid with to enjoy mistletoe. You don't have to be a Saturn worshiper to have a tree. You don't have to honor Yule as a fertility god, as the green man. And you don't have to be Wiccan to make wreaths. Isn't he gorgeous? And you don't need to believe in any of those gods or saints to enjoy this visitor. And you don't need to believe in Sleipnir, his 8-legged horse. 8 reindeer, 8 legs. Okay? To listen for the sound of hooves on your rooftop. You don't need to believe in Mithras. And you don't need to believe in Jesus. You just celebrate the return of the light. Yes? Thank you very much.